Hello, my name is Emma, and in today's video we are going to talk about grammar. And specifically, we are going to talk about the present perfect progressive. And this video is a bit special because in this video I am going to challenge you to use the present perfect progressive in a sentence or in a conversation this week. Okay, so maybe you've heard of the ice bucket challenge. Well, this isn't that. This is the present perfect progressive challenge, okay? And I hope you do this. So here's the challenge. Use present perfect progressive tense in one conversation this week. So in order to do this, first I'm going to teach you what is the present perfect progressive. We can also call it the present perfect continuous. You might know it by that name. So I'm going to talk about what it is, why we use it. I'm going to teach you about the form of it. So how does it look? And then we're going to practice it, and we're going to talk about how we can actually use this in a conversation. Because I know what happens with many students. They go to class, or they're studying online, and they find these great grammar worksheets or resources, and they do them at home, and it's great on paper, but then when they're actually in a conversation, they get scared about making a mistake, or they can't remember the grammar, and so they don't use it. So this video is more practical because I want you to use this grammar. Okay, so let's look at some examples of the present perfect continuous or present perfect progressive. That's going to get tiring to say. It's such a long grammatical term. So if I make a mistake, when I'm saying the word, don't mind that. Okay, so I have some examples here. My first one, I have, so this is a part of the form, been working at my company for 5 years. So just take a moment to think about that. I have been working at my company for 5 years. Now let's look at another example. We're going to compare some examples and then think about what they all mean. He has been dating my friend for 2 months. He has been dating my friend for 2 months. Okay. Let's look at a third example. We have been studying English forever. Sometimes it might feel that way, but bear with me. We have been studying English forever. Okay, so what do these sentences have in common? Well, first of all, you probably realize these are all present perfect progressive sentences, and they have a lot of things in common. The main thing that we're using the present perfect progressive for is we're talking about how long something is happening. Okay, so we're talking about the duration of time, how long something happens for. So you'll notice I have been working at my company for 5 years. 5 years is an amount of time, okay? He has been dating my friend for 2 months. 2 months is a period of time. We have been studying English forever. Forever is a very long period of time, okay? So we're talking about periods of time when we're talking about the present perfect progressive. And we're really answering the question, how long or how much time, okay? So now let's talk a little bit more about the meaning and the form. Okay, so we've looked at some examples of the present perfect progressive, and let's think a little bit more about the meaning. I've drawn here a timeline, okay? So this is now, today, right now. This is the future, and this is the past, okay? So when we're talking about any grammar, what can be really helpful is looking at timelines. They can really help you understand, what these different tenses mean. So let's look at our timeline and what the present perfect progressive tense would look like on the timeline. So I have here my first example. I have been working at my company for 5 years. This means that 5 years ago, so let's go to the past, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I started working, so this is the beginning, And this action continued and continued and continued to right now. So I'm still doing it. So when we're talking about this tense, we're talking about something that began in the past and kept happening. You know, I kept working, and it has continued to now. So it hasn't stopped. It's an action that started before, kept happening, and now we're in the present and I'm still doing it. So there's been no end. So I have been working at my company for 5 years. You could imagine, maybe you know somebody who has a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Think about dating. There's two famous actors, Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell. They're older actors. I think they've been dating for 30 years. I could be wrong. But you could use the present perfect progressive to describe their relationship. How long have Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell been dating for? Okay, and I could be very wrong with this. My trivia might be a bit off, but Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell have been dating for over 30 years. So that means that if this is 30 years ago, they started dating here, and they kept dating, and they're still dating today, okay? So this is how we use the present perfect progressive. We're really focused on the time period, and we're talking about something that started in the past and continued to now. So we've talked about the meaning, and we'll do some practice in a moment, but before we begin practicing, I want you to think about the form, or how does the present perfect progressive look? So I have here our subjects. We can have I, if I'm talking about myself. I can talk about you. I can talk about we. Or I can talk about they. Maybe I'm talking about friends, they. And when I'm using you, we, they, I, or any of these types of subjects, the next thing that comes for this tense is the word have. I have, you have, we have, they have. And then we have the word been. Okay, so you have been, we have been, they have been, I have been. And then here we have our action word, or our verb. And you'll notice it ends in ing. So we can put any verb here. You have been studying English for a long time. We have been watching YouTube for 10 hours. I don't know, I hope not. That's a long time to watch YouTube, but they have been working hard for days, okay? So this is, if we're thinking about dating, Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn, they have been dating for 30 years, okay? So I want you to start thinking about ways you can use this maybe in your own life. Now, when we're talking about he, she, or it, this is when it gets a little bit more difficult. We're not going to use have anymore. We're going to use has. He has, she has, it has. She has been dating her boyfriend for 5 years. He has been working at his company for 20 years. It has been raining for weeks, okay? And again, the focus is on the amount of time. That's why we're using this. We want to know how long, okay? So now we're going to learn how to use this tense. And again, you're going to have to practice this. It's good to even take out a piece of paper right now. And what you can do is you can try to add different verbs here, okay? Just to practice, get used to using this, because we're going to use it in conversation in a moment. But before that, I'm going to teach you how to use this in the question form, okay? Okay, so now we've looked at a little bit about the form when we're saying the present perfect progressive in a sentence. What about if we want to ask somebody a question in the present perfect progressive? How would we do that? Well, usually the question starts off with the words, how long? Because what we're interested in is the period of time, okay? So how long? And then we will have the word either have or has, depending on what our subject is. So for example, if I'm talking about myself, I use I, you, they, we, then we would use have. Or if I'm talking about he, she, or it, I would use has. So how long have I? How long has he? How long has she? How long has it? Okay. And then after that, we have the word been, just like before. Been, our verb, and ing. Okay, so let's take a moment to make up some sentences together. How long have you been watching this video? How long have you been studying English? How long have you been living in your apartment or your house? Okay, so just some examples. And then if we wanted to use he, she, or it, how long has it been snowing? How long has it been raining? How long has he been reading his book? Okay, so you can see how we use this question in conversation. So let's do some practice together, and then I'll talk a little bit more about our challenge. So I have here part of our question. It starts off with how. There's a missing word and a missing word. You've been studying English. So how can we make this into a proper question? Well, first we need the word long. How long? And should this be have or has? Well, if we look, we see the word you. You, okay, so we know it has to be have. How long have you been studying English? And what would our answer be? So I want you to think about yourself. How long have you been studying English? I have, so what do we need here? I have been studying. The ing is very important. I have been studying English for, and you can fill in the blank. How long have you been studying English? Maybe 2 months, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years. Okay. I'll tell you about myself. Well, I'm not going to put a number because I don't want you to know my age, but I'll say this. I have been studying English for my whole life, and I continue to study English. I learn new words all the time in English. I have been studying for many, many years. Okay, so let's do another one. How long have you been working at your company? Okay, are you a student? Do you have a job? Do you work somewhere? If you work somewhere, or maybe you know somebody who has a job, you can ask them, how long have you been working at your company, at your firm, at the hotel, wherever your friend or where you yourself might work? And the answer would be, what could we put here? I have been working at, and you can say the name of your company, for 5 years, for 10 years, for 2 months. And maybe you're not working. You can say, I have been studying at school or at university or at college. I have been studying at my high school for 4 years. Okay, so you could change working to studying if you want as well. Okay, so back to the challenge now. We've done some practice with the present perfect progressive. So how are you going to use this in a conversation this week? So maybe you might want to follow this and ask somebody about their job. How long have you been working at such and such place? Okay. Maybe you want to ask somebody about their relationship. How long have you been dating, your girlfriend or your boyfriend? Maybe you want to ask someone about their hobbies or something they're interested in. Some people watch Netflix or television shows, and they spend a lot of time watching. So you might want to ask them, if you have a friend who loves Game of Thrones, for example, you might ask them, how long have you been watching Game of Thrones today? And maybe they'll say 11 hours, okay? I have been watching Game of Thrones for, 11 hours today. Or, you can ask them about a book. Maybe they're reading a very thick book. How long have you been reading that book for? I have been reading that book for 2 years now. It's a very long book, okay? So think about relationships, dating. Think about work. Think about studying. Maybe they're studying another language. Think about their hobbies, their activities. And remember, what you really want to find out is the length of time or the time period they've been doing something for, okay? So I hope you do this present perfect progressive challenge. I think it's really good if you take the grammar you're learning here and you use it in a conversation. That's what we want, all right? So to practice this more, you can come visit our website at www.engvid.com. And there you can take our quiz to make sure that, you understand the form and the meaning of this. This might be an idea to do before you use this in conversation. And if you don't have anyone to practice with, try it with a mirror, okay? If you have friends who speak English or something like that, that's great. But if not, that's okay. You can even write present progressive or present perfect progressive in our comments, okay? Try it there. I'm sure other students will also be using our comment board to write these types of sentences. So that's a great way to get some practice as well. I also invite you to come check out or to subscribe to my channel. I have a lot of other resources there on grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and all sorts of other topics related to English. So I highly recommend it. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.